why am I here? Why am I asking you to listen to me? Well, I'm not asking you to listen to me, actually. I'm asking you to listen to your heart or your conscience or your soul or wherever it is inside of you that you keep your sense of what is right and wrong. And I'm asking you to listen to that and recognize that sending children or raising children in institutions is wrong. I'm not here today to tell you all the heartbreaking stories I hear from people who went to boarding school. The reason I'm not doing that is because this is about an idea, it's about a principle, and so often it's about day-to-day things. It's about the mundane things, about what it is to be a child, what it is to be family, what it is to be community. And it's not always the most dramatic stories that hit me the most. For example, in the 1970s, Royston Lambert, a sociologist, conducted a number of investigations with boarding school pupils. And the one that really sticks in my mind is he took a group of boarders and a group of non-boarders, aged 7 and 8. He gave them each a list of tasks to do, craft, sport, various different activities. And they were asked to choose a friend to perform each task with. All of the non-boarders, or overwhelmingly most of the non-boarders, chose the same friend for each activity, their best friend. The boarders chose a different friend for each activity. So you could say they could already choose a cabinet, or you could say they'd already lost part of that gift for intimacy, part of that innocence, part of what it is to be a small child. They were already thinking strategically.
The best days of your life, character-building experience, helps you to develop a stiff upper lip. Those are perhaps some of the caricatures of a modern, or perhaps not so modern, British boarding school experience. Of course, like so many things, there will be at least a kernel of truth in that. My experience of boarding schools is that they used to be austere, they were Spartan, bullying existed. And as we've read in the press in recent months, there was, in certain schools, criminal activity that took place. But that's not what boarding schools are like in the main in the 21st century. They are still not perfect. I know of no institution, no organisation that is based on human beings that is perfect. But they have changed massively. They are much more homely. There are carpets, there's heating, there are generally small groups, small rooms, perhaps 4 in a room. They have their own ensuite bathrooms in some cases. Mothers are hard to sell to often when it comes to boarding, but the experience now mainly is that they are very happy to give their children over for short periods of time to the care of the school.
Even now that boarding schools are more homely, people have teddy bears and mobile phones and carpets. The general principle is still the same, that you are raising children away from home. And when that makes them sad, they have to keep busy so that they don't realise they're sad, and they have to find ways of adapting.
Boarding has changed, and the days of the past are firmly behind us. Not all children do come from settled nuclear families, and in a lot of cases it's very helpful for them to have the stability that is school. In many cases, for 2 or 3 evenings a week, it's a better experience to be amongst their friends, amongst adults who are giving them their undivided attention, than to be latchkey kids, have to go home, often commuting quite large distances, and not have the opportunity for that perfect family life. And there's perhaps more opportunity for that at the weekends when they can have the undivided attention of their children.
Why have children if you want to send them away? You know, that's what people ask me in Europe. I spend most of my time in Europe these days. I'm married to a Danish woman. I live most of my life in France. Why have children if you want to send them away? Simple question. You think it's a simple answer, but it's simple and complex. So British boarding schools advertise that they take children from the age of 3. I've seen that advert. And the normal age is 7, 8, or 9. I've spent 10 years myself in boarding schools as a child, 2 years teaching in boarding schools, 43 years trying to figure out why we do it. This is very, very dangerous nonsense. This idea that some children are right for boarding and some children are not. Children belong in families. So I had this incredible response from the public, people feeling they could break out of their shame because if you had this really privileged education, if you go to Loreto, it costs your parents 30 grand a year, around that figure. This is about what I earn. So how could you come through an education like that and say you didn't like it? Because your parents made a lot of sacrifices very often to do that.
Ladies and gentlemen, Honourable Chair. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you today about choice, why boarding school, particularly at a young age, actually increases communication and better relationship with your parents, and thirdly, why routine and that choice leads to like a better discipline, a better understanding of routine that aids you in later life. But more importantly, the proposition start their speech with this question about why have children if you want to send them away? Well, like, I'm not pretending for 2 seconds that my parents found it easy to send me away to boarding school. In fact, they were in tears and tried to hide it from me when they left me. But they presumably sent me away to boarding school and spent a lot of money doing that because they felt that the benefits I would gain would be more than they could give me if I was at home, because they wanted the best thing for their child. And I have to say that I agree with them, and I'm pleased that they gave me that opportunity.
Not one theory of child development supports taking children out of the family. Not one. Since the only people who did it in any numbers were these famous Spartans, yeah, or the Jesuits. But they did it really to break the child's will. And you break the child's will by breaking their emotional language, the language of emotions. So why do we do it? Well, it's a really complex question. I've been thinking about it a lot. And what I came up with in my first book was saying it's to do with the British attitude to children. It's actually not a good thing to be a child here. It's good to be grown up, independent. And look what grown-up, independent chaps we've got running our country. And, you know, there was a movement here a few weeks ago, I seem to remember, where people said, actually, we'd rather not be ruled by these kind of people. And, you know, and then they started the bullying and said, you go that way, we'll take all your money away from you. So, you know, in terms of this complex question, historically, you have to think the 3 E's: empire, elitism, entitlement. That's what gets bred into the children who have their emotional language taken away from them, and that's the compensation. So then I have the media all the time onto me. And the media do it so basically. Remember, I say it's a simple thing, but it's complex. So, Mr. Duffell, you say everyone is scarred for life by boarding. This is a kind of Daily Mail thing. No, I'm not saying that. So, you know, surviving is the issue. And the thing is, for children, every child has to survive being in an institution with no parents. They've got carpets, they've got mobile phones, they've got flexi-boardings. They don't have parents. This is a simple thing. Get it into your mind. They don't have parents. And in puberty, you don't just need parents, you actually need parenting. And you cannot do that at a distance. You don't need quality time, I'm afraid. You need quantity time.
You as a parent want to send your child to a good education, not just like the local school that may not be very good. You want to give them a good education. The only way they can get that is boarding at a young age, and you're happy to do that because you know the people there are trained. But more importantly, the boarding school provides a haven for children whose parents may be going through divorce, there may be issues with drugs, there may be like split families, and like I've seen children go through that. It's not exactly great, but they use boarding school as like a place where they can like remove themselves from the situation, where they don't have to go home and hear their parents fighting and shouting at each other, when they can come home and the parents just for a week can like pull things together and like produce a united front, and as a result you get a child who has like a okay functioning family like to their face, even if like maybe what's going on at home isn't great. They're removed from those kind of situations which you would never ever want to place a child in. That's not remotely because there was any problems at home, it's because it looked like great fun. Like we had a sleepover, we had Coco, we watched Trini and Susanna, which is appalling television, but like we had a great time and it was really good fun and all my best friends were there. I solidified my friendships. I'm still friends with those people because we went through that, because they're basically my sisters now. And I think that's a great thing, and I think you should offer children that opportunity. And I think, proposition tell us that like the one thing that children don't have in boarding schools is their parents. Well, let me tell you, sometimes I don't want my parents.
Even if it's not quite so traumatic to go to boarding school as a teenager or as an older child, it still messes people up. It's still not right. It messes people up because at a crucial stage of the development, they lack the role models that they need to turn into adults. They can miss out on seeing adults in romantic relationships, seeing people work and earn money, seeing people do all kinds of routine and mundane things which will prepare them to have colourful, emotional lives as adults. Again, going back to the idea that it's not the most dramatic stories I hear that hit me the most, it's the dullness, the lack of colour, the lack of emotion. As with the man who wrote on my website simply, "I have no memories of my adulthood that are of any particularly strong emotional consequence." Also, an elephant in the room is that largely people who go to boarding schools miss out on living with people and mixing with people who are not as wealthy as they are. And I believe this has to cause problems with their ability to sympathise and empathise with those less fortunate themselves. As a woman, I don't feel happy about raising men and always being governed by men whose only frame of reference for women might be the mothers who sent them away, or the mothers they left, and the servants who make their beds. And I take it personally. I take it personally as a mother, and I'm a full-time mother, that an institution claims to do the job that I do.
The quality of care that boarding schools have now has changed immeasurably in the last 15 years or so. Care standards, the Care Commission, GERFEC, getting it right for every child, national minimum standards, an inspection regime that's very strict, means that children are looked after and cared for much better than they ever have been before, and the chances of abuse and bullying are very much reduced. Does it happen? I think that there is still probably in most schools some things that shouldn't happen. It's not perfect, but it's considerably better. At the heart of boarding are children, and as boarding professionals, we are keen that children thrive.
You have better families and relationships and communications because of boarding school. And I think, so let's see. So we have proposition telling us that going through puberty in like a same-sex gender institution is hell. Yeah, it's hell, right? Like, it's definitely hell. But it's also quite funny. And it also teaches you, a lot, right? Like, you're constantly confronted with these emotions that the proposition tell us you never see. You're confronted with, like, girls bursting into tears. You're confronted with, like, two people arguing over, like, whether Thorpe Park is a great, like, gamed theme park or something, like the most ridiculous things in the world. And because you're confronted with it and because you cannot escape it, you have to learn to deal with it. And as a result, you learn to deal with like friends of yours who are going through difficult times. You learn how to be diplomatic. You learn that there's more to communication than just being like aggressive and out there. And I think the really important thing is that when you go home, as a result, because you've matured, because you've had to deal with these people, when you go home, your parents treat you like an adult and you live up to that responsibility. And because you're away from home, you have like a sort of, so when I go to school when I was a really, really young child, because you're away from your parents, there is some kind of loyalty to them and their values, and because you're away from them, you try even further to live up to them. So I don't buy the argument that like just because you're away from home, you like lose the family values or like you lose a relationship with your parents. In fact, I think it's strengthened. And I think like my relationship with my parents in terms of communication and like never having really like argued with them in any serious way has been hugely strengthened by the fact that I've been removed from them and appreciate them more.
So every child has to survive it. It doesn't have any choice but to survive, to adapt. And children are very good at doing that, but there's a cost. And the cost is to the ability to trust people later on in life, the ability to show who they really are, and the ability to have contact with their emotions. Those are the basic things. There's more, because it's complex. And then, of course, 24/7 institutions. My friend is right. You cannot ever stamp out bullying and abuse. It's never going to be possible. But in a 24/7 institution, it's much harder than anywhere else because these kids are not getting touched for 10 years of their lives. They're not getting anybody putting their arms around them. Now they're damped with all this inspection.
We can't stay quiet on this any longer. We cannot let this knowledge be ignored or our instincts be dismissed in perhaps the same way women for a long time may have had their instincts dismissed and been pressured by society into giving their kids up. And if we don't value the nurture of our children, how can we value the nurture of anyone else? How can we value nurses and care workers and teachers? And if we don't value the inherent vulnerability of children, if we don't see that's something to be treasured and to learn from, if we see childhood as something to be rushed through to create independent little adults, what are we missing out on? And how will we respond to other vulnerable people in society? But as I said, you don't have to listen to me. I'm just a woman who loves her husband and her kids. I'm just a wife and a mother, like a lot of you here. And perhaps there's an awful lot of history and politics goes into making sure you don't normally hear voices like mine saying that raising children in institutions is wrong. Thank you.